Hari Om Tat
Hare
Sat.
Krishna. So now you've heard the nice parrots singing nicely for Krishna. I also sing like a bird, but it's a crow. But as long as we're birds for Krishna, that's what the point is. No matter what we are, we try to do something for Krishna.
Jai. Hari Hari.
So we will sing a little song now.
We're having Srimad Bhagavatam class now to be given by His Grace Kshudy Prabhu. So now Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Yes. All right. You ready? Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Yasoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharadhari Yasoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Nana Rajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhadrakacharya Ostaterra Sattva Sriman His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhadrakacharya Ostaterra Sattva Sriman His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Gaudiya Vaishnavindi Ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki. Prem Shikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki. Jagannath Subhadra Balaram Ki. Krishna Balaram Ki. Radhashyam Chandra Ki. Prem Shikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. So we will be reading from the 14th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, is that correct? No? Okay. How about we read from the 10th canto, 27th chapter, 6th verse? Will that be okay? Okay, good. First we will say the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I won't recite a whole big long group of prayers, but I will say a short one. See if you can remember the words to this. Krishna, please help me. Yes, that's the whole idea, isn't it? So, let's see what we can unpack from this verse. Almost. Here we go. Text 6, chapter 27. Pitā, gurus, tvam, jagatām, adhīśo, duratyayaḥ, kāla, upātta-daṇḍaḥ, hitāya, cecchā-tanubhiḥ, samīhase, mānaṁ, vidhunvan, jagad-īśa-māninām, pitā gurus tvam jagatām adhīśo, duratyayaḥ kāla upātta-daṇḍaḥ, hitāya cecchā-tanubhiḥ samīhase, mānaṁ vidhunvan jagad-īśa-māninām, pitā gurus tvam jagatām adhīśo, duratyayaḥ kāla upātta-daṇḍaḥ, hitāya cecchā-tanubhiḥ samīhase, mānaṁ vidhunvan jagat-īśa-māninām, pitā gurus tvam jagatām adhīśo, duratyayaḥ kāla upātta-daṇḍaḥ, hitāya cecchā-tanubhiḥ samīhase, mānaṁ vidhunvan jagat-īśa-māninām. Repeat. Ladies, any others? Okay. Word for word translation. Pitā, the Father. Guru, the spiritual master. Tvam, unto you. Jagatām, of the entire universe. Adhīśaḥ, the supreme controller. Duratyayaḥ, insurmountable. Kāla, time. Upātta, wielding. Daṇḍaḥ, punishment. Hitāya, for the benefit. Cecchā, and icchā, assumed by your own free will. Tanubhiḥ, by your transcendental forms. Samīhase, you endeavor. Mānaṁ, the false pride. Vidhunvan, eradicating. Jagat-īśa, lords of the universe. Māninām, of those who presume themselves to be. Translation. If Indra could have spoken this verse in English, you know what he would have said? You are the Father, and spiritual master of the entire universe, and also its supreme controller. Anybody here a supreme controller? You? Good luck with that. You are insurmountable time, imposing punishment upon the sinful for their benefit. Indeed, in your various incarnations, selected by your own free will, you act decisively to remove the false pride of those who presume themselves to be masters of the world. Now you can repeat it after me. You are the Father and spiritual master of this entire universe, and also its supreme controller. You are insurmountable time, imposing punishment upon the sinful for their own benefit. Indeed, in your various incarnations, selected by your own free will, you act decisively to remove the false pride of those who presume themselves masters of the world. Purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The word hitāya is significant here. Lord Krishna protects religion and chastises the wicked for the benefit of the entire universe. Foolish and faithless pseudo-priests criticize God for punishing the living entities through the actions of nature. But whether Lord Krishna punishes them indirectly through nature or directly in his incarnations, as mentioned here, he has a perfect right to do so because he is the Father, spiritual master, and supreme ruler of the entire universe. Another way he curbs down the false attempts of the conditioned souls to establish the kingdom of God without God is through his feature as insurmountable time. It is said, spare the rod and spoil the child. That is a fact. It is actually the Lord's mercy that he takes the trouble to rectify our misbehavior. We'll read that again. It is actually the Lord's mercy that he takes the trouble to rectify our misbehavior, although faithless persons criticize the Lord's fatherly vigilance. We practice this with vigilance, not with vigilantes. We don't try to be Krishna and punish people ourselves, because Krishna is using this to rectify. It's kind of interesting. We step back a little bit from this, and Indra was waiting to have a sacrifice done in his name, and he was very attached to this. And when he thought Krishna was just a small child, he decided that he was very upset that he should be getting this sacrifice, not the Govardhan hill. And so we read about how he unleashed the torrents of rain and caused terrible destruction. Must have been a big offense. Krishna put him in that position. If someone puts you in a position, you don't want to go and insult them and cause them trouble, do you? It doesn't seem like a good move. You might get ousted right away. You see that in some of the countries, they decide people have done something bad even before they did, throw them into prison. So it looks like Indra could be in total trouble. Looks like he could be finished. And where did he do this? In Vrindavan. Is that the worst place to make an offense? And how many people did he offend? All the residents of Vrindavan, all the cows, and Krishna, who's the sum total of everything, plus his own personality. And the rain came for 7 days. And Krishna was cursing Indra, right? The whole time, did he curse Indra while he was under the hill? Do we have any verses like that? Or did he just do the next needful thing? If it was raining, he just lifted up a hill. Like we open an umbrella. He did it just like that, or like the child picks up a mushroom. So it looks like Indra must be finished. He's the big demigod. And now all of a sudden, he's surrendering to Krishna, and he's speaking lucid words about how Krishna is the supreme controller, how he is the spiritual master of the universe, and how he just wants to serve Krishna. It's amazing how this came about after Indra's desires to enjoy the sacrifice, Indra's false pride, and the amount of time he spent. You slap someone, that's a second. But 7 days of rain, that's a long time to be a continued offense. So Krishna could never forgive him for that, could he? And all the bad things he'd done could never help him out. Well, this is something interesting. We read in Bhagavad-Gita, hopefully if we do read, we read it. In the 7th chapter, Krishna says that this divine energy of mine, consisting of the 3 modes of material nature, is difficult to transcend. But those who've surrendered to me can easily cross beyond it. So it's kind of an interesting picture. It's difficult to transcend, but those who've surrendered, it becomes easy, amazingly. It just shows it's pretty clear. It doesn't say sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's a little bit bad. It's like insurmountable when you don't surrender, and it becomes easy when you do surrender. Amazing situation. So then why doesn't everyone surrender? Well, Krishna explains that in the 15th verse of the 7th chapter, that there's 4 kinds of people who don't surrender to me. The mudas just work hard like an ass and want a meager amount of sense gratification. The Naradamas have a nice social system, an economic system, and they basically just do what everyone else is doing. As long as the crowd is doing it, then that's all I need to do, correct? Follow the crowd, whatever's popular. Well, that's not popular anymore, don't do it. So, then we also have those who have knowledge, but their knowledge is stolen by illusion. They may be scientists, they may be teachers at the university, and they have so much knowledge, but their knowledge is stolen by illusion. And then you have the out-and-out demons. So Krishna can influence some of these people. He uses ways and means. The next verse talks about the 4 kinds of people who do surrender to Krishna. Those who are distressed, those who are in need of money, those who are in search of inquisitive, and those who are in search of knowledge of the absolute truth. So not everyone is in search of knowledge of the absolute truth. And not everyone is just inquisitive. Or we may have a little bit of this, but Krishna can use other things to motivate us to come towards him. This is the interesting thing we see in Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's instructions, is that Krishna wants us to get out of this material entanglement and come back to him even more than we want to get out of the entanglement and go back to him. But Krishna has given us free will, so he won't interfere with our free will. But he can give us suggestions about the wonderful benefits we get if we're curious to know about what spiritual life is all about, and if we really want to have knowledge of the absolute truth. And of course, he uses the distress or miseries or problems that we think here it's said that he punishes those people, but for their own benefit. We find that the punishment actually becomes a benefit because the punishment is small if we take the lesson and use this as an opportunity to surrender to Krishna. So many of the things that we consider to be problems, distresses, unwanted things are actually just opportunities to surrender to Krishna. We think there are so many mistakes, but in Krishna's world there's no mistakes except that our angle of vision about what is really going on. We have to clarify our vision and see what Krishna wants. We always want what we want. Is there a prayer you can say to get what you want all the time? To get your wish? You want to hear it? Krishna, today my wish is that everything will turn out exactly the way you want it to turn out. And then I get my wish. I can get my wish if I align my will with Krishna's. Or I may consider myself 50% surrendered. If 1 week I let Krishna do it his way, and the next week he has to do everything my way, that makes me 50% surrendered? Does it? So how well do we do by forcing Krishna? Indra tried it, and he's a lot greater than we are. But what is really amazing here is how Krishna used this circumstance for Indra. He, of course, had so many things simultaneously. All the residents of Vrindavan, including the cows, got to be with each other and see Krishna for a whole week. Krishna is good at solving many things with one particular action or pastime. So all the residents got to see Krishna for a week. And Indra got to see how Krishna, because it's sort of a dilemma. You know, how can you be a cowherd boy and be God? This is what we call the law of contradiction. You can't be old and young at the same time. But Krishna can be. He is Adim Puranam Purusham, the oldest person in creation, yet he always appears as a fresh youth. Navajovanamscha. That's a pretty good trick to pull off. So Krishna is not subject to these kinds of contradictions. But look how amazing it is that even though Indra had made these mistakes, Krishna gave him a chance. And he took him to a secluded place so he wouldn't have to embarrass himself in front of all of the other people. We take a step to Krishna, and he takes 10 steps to us. And when can we start this? At any time. We find that the actions are more or less the same. If yesterday was a really bad day for me, you know what I do? We wake up, we come to Mangal Artik, chant rounds attentively, either give or hear the Bhagavatam class, do more reading, try to help people in their Krishna consciousness, do some service. And if yesterday was a perfect day, what do? You come to the Mangal Artik to continue what you'd already done. Just like a person who's making sales. If they didn't make sales yesterday, they try today. If they made a lot yesterday, it's even more reason to continue. So if we keep continuing the same spiritual actions, but when all else fails, Krishna uses this distress. Some people appear to deserve it, and some don't, but it all comes as a benefit for those who accept it. When we accept the circumstances as they are and try to go on serving Krishna, no matter what the consequences are, or no matter whether our own needs are fulfilled. You know, they think God is confused when the thief is praying, please make sure the shop is locked. And the shopkeeper is praying, please make sure it's unlocked. And poor God is confused about what to do. Or does God already know what to do? Or is he sitting around waiting for our instructions about what we need to do? Or what he needs to do? It doesn't appear that way. And we see that Krishna used this circumstance to get Indra to realize is sort of backed into a corner. And when you realize somebody's much more powerful than you, they say, if you can't beat them, join them. So obviously, if Indra, with all of his power, couldn't beat Krishna, if the child held up the hill on the left finger, maybe he'd better join him instead of keep fighting him. This wasn't the way with Duryodhan, was it? Duryodhan, Krishna came to negotiate on behalf of the Pandavas to work out something with Duryodhan about how they could each have part of the kingdom. And Duryodhan says, well, we'll catch Krishna. And Krishna showed a portion of his universal form. So if Krishna showed you a portion of his universal form, would you keep fighting? Duryodhan wanted what he wanted no matter what the cost. He says, I don't care if you are God, I still want the whole kingdom. This would have been the time to try to negotiate, wouldn't it? The person has a gun at your head. Do you try to negotiate or continue with your demands? But he says, I don't care. I still want the whole kingdom. And we see that didn't work out so well for him. But we see that there's many people that some of the times Krishna was curbing down their pride like Indra. Other times they really didn't deserve anything bad to happen. And yet Krishna used these circumstances as a way for them to either make spiritual progress or as an example to others. What happens when we totally depend on Krishna? There was one innocent boy named Prahlad. And he was supposed to be protected by his father. But it didn't work out so well. When his father heard that he had been talking about Krishna in the schools, he says, where are you getting this knowledge from? He says, from the same place you do, from Krishna. And of course, Hiranyakashipu was not very happy. He wanted to have his son thrown in with the snakes. They put him in boiling oil. They threw him off the cliffs, and the rocks turned to cotton so that he was saved from any difficulty. And then eventually, he said, where is your God? is he in this pillar? And when he hit the pillar, Lord Nrsingadev came out. But Prahlad didn't have to do anything. He didn't do anything wrong, and yet he didn't protest against the inconveniences. He just did what we all need to do at any moment, is depend on Krishna. You know, the whole material world is dangerous. We just lost a valuable brahmachari just coming back from the Radhakund. You know, people worry about so many things, but they kill 500 people with cars every day in India. You have to chant just before you cross the street here. Because some people have a proper license, some people pay a bribe, and other people just get in a car and drive it. Some people here tell me that there are no traffic laws in India. That what that tells me is they didn't bother to take a test and get a license. They just got in a car and drove one. So the material world is full of people who do this way. They don't know what the rules of the material world are. They think that because they don't know them, that they don't exist. And so they just carry on as if there's no rules that affect me. And of course, when they don't follow them, they cause pain to themselves and to other people. And then they're very upset when they deserve it, whereas someone like Prahlad Maharaj was not upset, even though he didn't deserve it. How about the Pandavas? There's 5 of them: Arjuna, Yudhisthira, Bhima, Nakula, and Sahadev. They were supposed to have the whole kingdom. And these Vedic stories are so good, because when I tell people I had an uncle like Dhritarashtra and a stepmother like Saruchi, I don't need to explain anymore. That gives the whole picture right there. So Uncle Dhritarashtra was not very caring for his nephews. Like my uncle said, he says, I only care about my children. I says, but you're my uncle. He says, I don't care about that. And that was like the Dhritarashtra. He wanted to have them killed. They were put in a house of shellac that they set on fire, but they escaped, and they banished them to the forest, and eventually they had to fight a war. And then Krishna used this distress on Arjuna. That's why sometimes when things are joyful and wonderful, we take that as Krishna's mercy. But we get the dark night of the soul, as they call it, like Arjuna did. That can also be a great benefit for us. That when things appear to go really wrong and we just really have to seek some shelter, this is actually a blessing, an opportunity. Krishna knew this. He took Arjuna out between the 2 armies. And he says, behold all the Kurus who are here anxiously awaiting to fight, because he knew that Arjuna would be despondent about after fighting his own relatives, the Kurus. And then Arjuna's in this dilemma. Krishna wants me to fight, but I don't want to kill my relatives. What about the programs of peacefulness? And he's in a dilemma. He didn't know what to do. So eventually he says, I think it's the 7th verse of the 2nd chapter. He says, I'm a disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. So if by the joy and seeking the absolute truth, we want to be surrendered to Krishna and to Prabhupada, or if because we're in so much difficulty that we just have no other out, either way becomes a benefit. If I give you 100 million rupees because you need it or because you want it, which one of those is a benefit? Either one is a benefit, yes? So either way we get this mercy, it's a benefit. So because of this, Arjuna because he was so despondent, he was waiting for the instructions. And Krishna instructed the whole Bhagavad-Gita. Was it only for Arjuna's benefit? It was for everyone's benefit, because we all have these kinds of dilemmas. Not as big as he did. We don't usually have to fight our relatives on a battlefield. And then how about Draupadi? The wife, she was the wife of all the Pandavas. Excuse me, this leg got a cramp. I'm gonna put it down here somewhere. Ooh. See, the miseries are caused by other living entities, material nature, and our own mind and bodies. So, I need to see if that cramp will go back into place. So Draupadi was lost in a gambling match. Thanks a lot, husbands, right? So the Kurus were going to disrobe her in front of all of the assembly of Kurus and Pandavas. So it sounded like a balanced program. You know, we take things in balance. Don't put everything in one basket. What I'll do is I'll hold on to the sari with one hand and reach out to Krishna with the other. Sounds like the best plan, doesn't it? It does sound good, because I'm using my own strength and I'm using Krishna's strength. It sounds good, doesn't it? It does sound good, but is it the best plan? Well, it wasn't working. So finally she realized she had to let go absolutely and just take shelter of Krishna. So when these circumstances come along that make us have to let go absolutely, we find this as a benefit. Then Krishna appeared as the sari, and the more they pulled, they couldn't take it all away. And so it became a benefit for her. And that's why Queen Kunti, the mother of the Pandavas, prayed that whenever miseries come, you're by our side. So it says, I pray that these miseries come again and again. I don't pray for miseries to come, but when they come, especially in Vrindavan, everything is so magnified. When something is joyful, it's just wonderful. When something appears to be like a problem, it appears like they just announced they're going to have the ISKCON Leadership Sangha on February 12th. Now that's obviously more than 2.5 months away, right? And when you go on there, somehow the PayPal wasn't working, and then I just realized, hey, this isn't a big dilemma. It can be solved later. And so I got ready to come down to give the class. Sometimes when things are a problem, what I do is I write them down and I put them before the pictures of deities I have, like Radhashyama Sundar and Radha Madhava and the Panchatattva, and I say this, my life is surrendered to you. These problems are your problems. You help me work them out. Because then when I do that, then it doesn't seem to be the real problem is that I am not Krishna conscious, that I'm not dependent on Krishna. Because when I am dependent on Krishna, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And we see here by the mercy of this, even if we've made mistakes, even if our consciousness hasn't been pure, like Lord Rama says in the Ramayana, if someone says, from this day forward, I am yours, he gives them the strength to carry on. And so Queen Kunti was praying that the difficulties happen again and again. And then we see others like the kāla snake. Oh, he was a terrible, horrible, bad, awful snake. And he kept trying to bite Krishna while Krishna was dancing on his heads. He didn't seem to have many good qualities, did he? He was acting like a snake. Maybe because he was one. So then when he finally realized that, hey, this Krishna must be the personality of Godhead, I have to surrender. And he surrendered. Krishna gave him benediction. Amazing, isn't it? When we decide to turn around and say, okay, Krishna, I'm yours, it doesn't matter where we've been. That's why we can't feel despondent that we're not as Krishna conscious as we'd like to be. I always feel I'm not as Krishna conscious as I would like to be, but I think any sincere devotee feels that way. Is it not true? Or so it says, I'm as Krishna conscious. Who's as Krishna conscious as they want to be and they don't want any more? Anybody? Okay, good. I'm not the only one. But, or if I'm thinking I'm a big Indra and I got it all going on, when it comes to water, I'm the king. None of this matters. What matters is that what can I do for Krishna? Like when Lord Rama was building the bridge to Lanka. Hanuman's moving the big stones and there's a squirrel kicking the dust in there into the ocean. And Hanuman says, get out of my way. I'm Hanuman and I'm moving big boulders to build the bridge to Lanka. The squirrel says, I want to help too. And Lord Rama says, Hanuman, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm moving the big boulders. And he's just kicking a little dust. And Rama says, where do you get your strength? From you. How about the squirrel? Also. Says, then they're each serving to your capacity. So I may be like a squirrel. So when I kick the dust, I try to kick the dust in the direction of service and not kick dust and dirt all over myself and the other devotees. I have to kick the dust in the right direction. So we see that this has happened with many of the devotees and even demigods over time. And Krishna uses it to either curb down their false pride or he uses it to help them realize that now is the time to surrender. Because it's kind of an interesting thing. We think of God as like Mahavishnu, universe has come out of his body. But for Krishna appears, he's actually the original. It says Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam, after it talks about the scheduled list of our incarnations in the first canto, that Krishna is the original, and that all the parts and plenary parts come from him. Well, why would God be a coward boy? Because he wants to be. He can be what he wants to be. But it kind of looks strange to think that here he is as a great, but he wants to have loving relationship with the devotees. That's more important than proving he's a supreme personality of Godhead. And so we find that when Krishna performs his pastimes, he does many things all at once. Krishna would go out to the cowherd fields, he would blow his buffalo horn, and all the cowherd boys would assemble to be with Krishna. And the one day they went out, on the way they were pulling the tails of monkeys and throwing their lunch baskets back and forth between each other and going into the ponds to stare at the frogs and having all kinds of wonderful pastimes. And then this big snake was there. But they thought maybe it's just a mountain cave. And they thought, well, if we go inside, Krishna will save us if it's a problem. So Krishna watched them all go inside. And of course, Lord Brahma is watching this. And he sees Krishna go inside, and then he's worried because this big snake shuts his mouth. But then Krishna expanded himself so large that this big snake choked. And then they all walked out, Krishna playing the flute like a cowherd boy. So even though Lord Brahma is the first person in creation, he's still mesmerized by this. And so when Krishna went on with the cowherd boys, he found a beautiful spot to take lunch. And he said, look at this spot here. There's a beautiful white sandy bank here by the Jamuna, and the brook there has gurgling water, and you hear the peacocks cooing and the birds chirping, and you can smell the jasmine and mogra in the air and hear the leaves rustling in the trees. And we can sit down here on this white sand, and some of the boys put their lunch on logs, and some of them on wood chips, and some of them on leaves, and some of them just in the sand, and they put Krishna in the center, and all of a sudden they forgot everything but Krishna, and the calves had disappeared. So Krishna said, don't worry, I will go to look for those. And he appeared like a cowherd boy. He put his flute in one side and was carrying a lugdu. What had happened was that Lord Brahma says, I better play a trick on him just to see if he's just a cowherd boy or really God. Sounded like a good idea. So he'd hidden all the calves away somewhere. So what's the best way to make someone's trick, even if you have a counter trick? What's the best way to make your counter trick work? Anybody know? Make them think the original trick worked. Krishna's wandering around looking like, oh, I wonder where those calves are. Brahma's thinking, oh, my trick worked, huh? So then, when he went to look for the calves, Krishna took away the cowherd boys. So then Krishna thought, well, I can't go back to Vrindavan empty-handed, so he expanded as all the calves and the cowherd boys. I'm not going to write on a board the formula he used. Krishna did explain it to one person, how he did it. Who was that? Balaram, because Balaram is expansion of Krishna. But for the rest of us, as they say, that's above our pay grade. We can't exactly understand how Krishna expands himself. It is explainable, but not to us. But Balaram understood it, of course. So when Lord Brahma came back, he was perplexed. And then Krishna showed him that all of these were actually Vishnu expansions. And then Brahma was so bewildered, but Krishna had mercy on him. Krishna took all of that away and let him see the beauty of the Vrindavan forest. And then, this chapter is the last one that Prabhupada did by himself. It's kind of amazing. We see how lucid this chapter is, the 13th chapter of the 10th canto. where the Brahma Vimohan Leela, and you see them with the microphone right up to Prabhupada, and he's speaking those that are just as lucid as anything else, which shows that if we surrender to Krishna, Krishna can help us despite of what else is going on. Prabhupada's body was in terrible condition, and it had been slowly deteriorating. It's not as if he came to America with good health. He had heart attacks on the way, he'd had diabetes, diabetics have all kinds of other troubles. And he'd been dwindling over the last year, but we all thought that Prabhupada could never leave. But it's amazing. Some people say, well, what did they do to him? Well, no. He had the condition and he held on longer than most people would be able to. And in that condition, we were all hoping that Prabhupada would just spring back to perfect health and be like it was in 1970 or 71. But for Prabhupada to do what he did was beyond what most of us could do. And he passed away, and of course, in a Krishna conscious mood, and said, you know, all of you, this time is coming for you. And yet he was still concerned with the other people. They would show up here, he'd say, did you get prasadam? Do you have a place to stay? In that condition, most people would only be worried about themselves. So we find when we depend on Krishna, we don't become so selfish. We are worried about serving Krishna, or not worried, but just concerned with it, and to help the other devotees. So we find that Krishna, we take a step to Krishna, he uses these advantages to take more steps to us, or he puts us in a dilemma that makes us take a step or two to Krishna, and we make more steps in his direction. And we can do things to help people get a chance to take these steps. I know that in my life. In 1967, I went to this music festival in Newport Beach. And at the end, the Mystic Arts people had put on a performance. They were singing this song, and I said, what's this song? And one of them said, well, they had a natural health food booth there where they made all vegetarian things. And they said, there's a Swami that has a temple on Pico Boulevard, and he taught us this mantra. And it goes like this: Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I chanted that with them. And then next week, a friend of mine was shooting at animals in the canyon behind where we lived. And then he squished a dove with a rock. And my mother had always told me how the dove was a special bird. It's the bird of peace. And they always stay in a couple. If one of them is gone, the other one just keeps looking for them. They always stay together. You see the doves, they're not the kabouters. Some people say, dove, oh, kabouter. No, it's not kabouters. There's every kabouter for themselves. But with the doves, they stick together. So I said, that's a cruel thing to do, isn't it? He said, well, you eat meat, don't you? I said, yes. He said, how many animals do they have to kill for you to eat meat? I said, probably a lot. He said, so is it any worse for me to kill one more bird? I said, you're right. He said, so it's okay for me to kill the bird? I said, no, I'll never eat meat again, and I didn't. So because I chanted, Krishna gave some revelation of what the importance was this. And so I never eat meat after that. Another thing happened, there was a bookstore in the Mystic Arts World people that put on this, they had a health food store, and they had an import store with things from Afghanistan and India, and they had a clothing part, and they had a book section. A couple of my friends worked in the book section. They'd say, can you watch it for me for 5 minutes? Which was always 30 or 40. But I found this one book called Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and so I was reading in that. And it said that bhakti means that we just ask God for some way to serve him. So I had my special meditation rock at the beach. All this is very close to where the temple in Laguna is now. And I would go to this rock, and I would pray for some way to develop love of God. And the Mystic Arts people, well, they were very forward-thinking, but they weren't quite there yet. They said, someday for real spiritual life, we have to give up illicit sex and intoxication. Not yet, of course. Even I think it was St. Augustine said, God, please make me chaste to you, but don't do it yet. So we don't want to do it yet. We'll do it sometime later in the future. So on January 7th, 1970, I went to my special rock, and I'm praying for some way to develop love of God, and I got this inspiration that if I really want that, I have to give up illicit sex and intoxication. I thought, it's January. What I'll do is have a few more beer parties. I'll date like 2 or 3 of the girls I know in high school I've been trying to date. And then when June comes and high school ends, then I'll give these things up. And I thought, well, if it's a good idea, I should do it, or if it's not, I shouldn't. Isn't it true? If it's a good idea in June, it must be good in January. So I thought, okay, this is kind of a big order, but God, I will give these things up for you, and you send me some way to develop love for you. And I opened my eyes, and about as far away as Gaur and Hitāya are, was a brahmachari walking towards me. And I thought, Hare Krishna? I thought first, before I opened my eyes, I thought, how long will it take me to find out? A week, a month, a year? And when I opened my eyes, a devotee was there. He came up to me. I said, what are you doing here at the beach? He says, well, we were above the next beach chanting. And all of a sudden, I felt this uncontrollable need to come down to the beach. He says, would you like to come and chant with us? I said, I think that's exactly what I'm supposed to do. So I find even the things in my life that were difficult, brought me closer to Krishna. I went to South Africa at 19 years old. I looked 13, and I went with a Swami. I was just the assistant. One day I woke up, there was a note, Dear Kshudy, decided to split. So I turned the page over. I looked for the other page, because I knew that when Rupa Goswami says we should confidentially reveal our mind, it means more than that. It doesn't mean just decided to split. And of course, the $2,000 was gone. So I had to come up with a plan. And so I wrote to Prabhupada that even though we were in debt, I was going to order $3,700 more Gitas and tell people they couldn't have the Gitas unless they bought the whole set. And I was going to make incense sticks and put them in a few stores and sell them at programs. And that would be I made all these decisions, and I thought, maybe I'm in trouble for making these decisions. A letter came back from Prabhupada, and when I opened it, and the first line said, I'm very much pleased at the responsibility you've taken to spread Krishna consciousness in South Africa at such a young age. Prabhupada talks about it in the Nectar Devotion tape, the first one, about a letter from South Africa. So then I thought, I guess I'm not in trouble, am I? So even though it's kind of a dilemma, and then what happened when this person went to Mumbai, Prabhupada said, you left that young boy alone with a $15,000 debt to book fund and took all the money with you? He says, give me whatever money you have. And Prabhupada collected $700 and sent me a receipt towards my book bill. So Krishna is like Prabhupada. They're always trying to help us in our dilemma, and they're pleased when we take the responsibility. That's why I love being in Vrindavan. But I have to go back to my home temple and do some preaching there and help my family become Krishna conscious. And then I go back to South Africa to do some preaching there, and that way I get a little of all of it in. They appreciate it now that it's been 50 years later, and I'm not what I used to be, meaning a child. But we can turn these dilemmas. When I had a child that died, I was on my way to pick up my other children for Christmas, and my mother called me and said, your child stopped breathing. I said, he's alive, isn't he? She said, no. And it was so final. So many things can be fixed. It was so final. But it made me have to surrender more. And my mother herself was Prabhupada's attorney. She was in her last days of her life. She was dwindling. She practiced law for 64 years. But at the end, she was saying things like, the end is not the end. And the caregiver taking care of her says, look, someone's up in the corner. Who's in the corner? Who's here? And my mother says, Prabhupada's here. She says, Prabhupada, please save me. So we find that Krishna can use any of these tools, including the difficulties, including the mistakes we've made. Of course, I'm not suggesting you make any mistakes, but when we make mistakes and try to surrender to Krishna, Krishna uses all of this to help us, and he's very good at that. So the point is, we don't have to worry about our past. We worry about now. What is in the conclusion of the Gita? Krishna says, Sarva dharmam parijajya mamekam saranam vraja aham shvam sarva papebhya mokshayashami masuchaha. So we don't commit sins thinking that we'll rectify it later, but we say, now Krishna, I give up all varieties of religiosity and just surrender to you. And then he relieves us of all these sinful reactions. We don't have to fear. So our only business is to turn our life and our will over to Krishna and to be conscious of him and to do service. And then Krishna takes care of the rest. That's his business. For us, we don't have to fear and we don't have to worry about sinful reactions. That's a pretty good payoff. So that's a pretty good place to conclude. We have a couple minutes if there's any question or correction. We'll start with Panchagoda.
You were mentioning how Prabhupada, had like diabetes and was at the last stage of his life. And we're supposed to see the spiritual masters non-different than God. And so sometimes we get a little bit bewildered when we see what appear like human frailties and or degeneration of the body. And we think, how do we see the spiritual master and him being non-different than God?
I think in that the real miracle in it is to see when we read that 13th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita, to see that even in that state of the body being frail, he can give a purport better than any of us could do in our youth. In that stage, his body appears to be frail, but spiritually, he was still far more spiritually potent than we could ever dream of being. Is it not true? Can any of you give a purport like that? On the deathbed especially? That's what's amazing. Just like Bhishma. I think Bhishma's on the bed of arrows. Well, he's supposed to be a big warrior. What's he doing on a bed of arrows? Now his body's finished. But in that state, it's so similar. Prabhupada was like on the bed of arrows. In that bed of arrows, Bhishma Dev gave such lucid instructions, just like Prabhupada gave lucid instructions when he was on his deathbed. Does that give some? Yes.
It is the consciousness which is most important.
Yes.
It's not the body.
No.
Where the body is mortal, so we have to leave our body somehow. As when Lord Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityaja, do not worry, I will protect you. It doesn't mean that we'll be protected from not dying. The consciousness will be protected. It will not fall down. So that's the meaning. So Srila Prabhupada's consciousness is all pure all the time. Krishna consciousness is there.
But if we die in good consciousness, then we've succeeded. And that's the miracle of it. Even the body being frail, he still never wavered. Just like Bhishma Dev on the bed of arrows. Here's a great warrior. He can't even move. But it was still glorious.
That is what is most important,
yes.
The consciousness.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for a wonderful, inspiring class based on your personal experiences as well. In regards to Panchagoda Prabhu, one point that comes to our mind is it is a huge red flag for all of us who become complacent in our bhakti, spiritual practices, and even going to the extent of committing sinful activities. It's passed on to the spiritual master. So that is a display telling us all that be careful. Once you have accepted a spiritual master, it's just not the spiritual master's one-way responsibility. Also, it is ours. So the many gurus have displayed such pastimes of falling dramatically sick, and that is due to the sins that they have taken upon their head of their disciples.
That's why to not be complacent, as I said earlier, even if everything is going well, we still try to improve our Krishna consciousness. Not have it like I'm a member of the Laguna Beach High School alumni, but we don't put that up on the board and you talk about it, and other than today you probably won't hear much about it. So we don't put it up on the wall, I'm a devotee, and forget it. It's the practice of Krishna consciousness that we do. Yes. One last quick one.
I was reminded of the verse in the Nectar of Instruction, verse 6, where it says, being situated in his original Krishna-conscious position, a pure devotee does not identify with the body. Such a devotee should not be seen from a materialistic point of view. Indeed, one should overlook a devotee's having a body born in a low family, a body with a bad complexion, a deformed body, or a diseased or infirm body. According to ordinary vision, such imperfections may seem prominent in the body of a pure devotee. But despite such seeming defects, the body of a pure devotee cannot be polluted. It is exactly like the waters of the Ganges, which sometimes, during the rainy season, are full of bubbles, foam, and mud. The Ganges waters do not become polluted. Those who are advanced in spiritual understanding will bathe in the Ganges without considering the condition of the water.
Thank you. So we'll end there. Thank you very much
No,
for the opportunity.
one more
Yes.
comment.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Right under the Tamal tree there in 1974, we saw Prabhupada was very ill. At least we could say we saw that Prabhupada was ill, but he said that it was due to his disciples not following. Actually, he said 80% of the leaders were not following, and this is why the illness was there. I always get a little uneasy when I hear anyone say Prabhupada had this, Prabhupada had diabetes. I was with him different times from 1972 through 1975. He never spoke about any material illness. He ate sweetmeats at every meal. From my vision, Prabhupada never had any material illness. And I find it very difficult when somebody speaks in that way. Not
Yes.
trying to find what
Yes.
you're saying is wrong or right, but Prabhupada always placed the responsibility on his disciples that if they were following, everything
Yes.
was fine. You know, he used the example of the iron rod and the fire. Prabhupada was 108% spiritual. There is no question of any material thing going on. I never saw him take any medicine over the course of 3 years I was with him. Anyway, I just wanted
Yes.
to add that to the...
No, I appreciate that, but my point in that was when some people accuse that some of the disciples must have done something to Prabhupada. The point was that, okay, the disciples are doing things to cause the spiritual master. He has the diabetes, he has things. It's not like all of a sudden he went from healthy to a bad condition. The point I was making is there's no scope to accuse someone of having done something to Prabhupada. The condition was there from the disciples, and it was showing as he was deteriorating. It didn't just happen overnight. That was my point. Do you understand the point I'm making there?
Yes, you understand the point I'm making?
I do understand the point you made. Yes. No, I think both points can go well together. The point is that it wasn't someone else's fault.
Yeah.
That someone didn't just give him a poison.
Just like I make the point, if you go into his quarters,
Yes.
you'll see one cabinet filled with oils and massage stones and this
Yeah.
and that, which over the course of a few months, there were different ways in which people had the opportunity to serve Srila Prabhupada. It wasn't the other way around that Prabhupada required all these different things.
Yes.
He had no need for anything, nor did he ever ask for anything, other than the ability to serve his spiritual master. So
That's amazing, isn't it? In that condition.
that's pure devotee, yes.
It is. That's why it's rare, right? Well, thank you for that comment. I didn't mean it to disagree with that. The point I was making is that you can't accuse someone of having done something to Prabhupada. That was my... Jai. Jai. Hare Krishna.